So, at this time, I'm going to introduce our keynote speaker, Jeff Abbas, and he's coming to us from Iowa. He's done a lot of exploring and talking and networking and organizing around this frac sand mining issue, and he's going to set the background of what we're going to do today. I gave him the charge of kind of giving us the umbrella, big picture, how the world gas and oil demand is impacting our driftless land. Jeff.
Thank you, Nate. Bear with me for just a second here while I set this up. Before I get started, I know that one of the things that bothers us the most is the collusion and the lack of ethics exhibited by so many politicians in Wisconsin, Minnesota, and Iowa, and the federal government. They're in it for the money. It's very clear to us. And that's at every level: township, community, county, state, federal. But you know, they're not all like that. I made a harried phone call on Wednesday, pretty late notice, but I thought, you know what, I should call our local rep because she's pretty good. She's got a good head for this thing. She knows what's at stake, and she doesn't have that fear that makes her kowtow to the big money people and to those people above her that may have a little difference of opinion because their wallet is a lot fatter. She's here. So we have one of our reps from the Iowa legislature here today, and I'd love to introduce her. Patty, would you please stand up? This is Patty Ruff, ladies and gentlemen. She'll get my vote again next time around. A couple of departures for me today. I spent my career in public speaking. I was in National Public Radio for 28 years. At those events, if I wasn't in a tuxedo, I was in a three-piece suit. I love this kind of stuff because if you don't show up in denim and hiking boots, they don't trust you. So I thank you for that. The other one is, I despise a couple of things. I don't like to work from notes. I don't like to work from prepared copy. But I am today because I have the other thing with me that I absolutely deplore, and that's facts and figures. I'm not going to be overbearing with them, but they are critical to what I want to present to you. Now, when I talked to Nate about this, and we talked about the presenting the world demand, as I got to think about it, I realized that every one of us in this room knows that the world demand has skyrocketed. We know that China is importing more oil and gas right now than any other country. In fact, you can take about the top 10 other countries and they don't even come close to what China is importing. We all know that the United States imports just a little less than half of our gas and oil from Canada, yet we export 38 to 40% of what we get here. We all know about the Koch brothers. And I don't know if Koch is right or Koch is right. The only thing I know is it's 4 letters, and it's not the 4 letters I prefer to use. The XL pipeline is a great example of just how awful these guys are. Some years back, there was a refinery that had been built by the Exxon Corporation to process what's called heavy crude, that very dirty, stinky, carbon dioxide-ridden, chemical-ridden crap that comes out of the tar sands and other sources. Well, Exxon operated that for about 3 or 4 years, and they lost more money every year, so they shut it, just completely. They shut it down. And it sat idle for years and years, until the Koch brothers learned about it and used their magical influence in Washington, D.C. to make sure that the Keystone XL terminated at that refinery that they had just recently purchased. On May 18th, the Department of Energy gave the last go-ahead for a loading and export facility, also just south of Houston, also owned by the Koch brothers, to begin exporting liquefied natural gas to the tune of 1.2 billion cubic feet a day. These are all things I don't have to tell you about because we all know this. So what I want to do, working from my prepared copy, is basically tell you how this has not come about, but the reality of it all. The demand is there. But that demand has been falsely created by those people who are involved with making sure the business is profitable. It's the same people who set up the demand in the housing market in 2006, 2005, and the same people responsible for that ultimate collapse, that bubble that burst. We're going to have the same bubble here in 6 to 10 years with this fossil fuel fiasco. So I'll give you kind of the background on that, and I'll give you the only key that we have, the only means that we have at our disposal to actually put a stop to that. And that power is in our hands. All we have to do is begin using it and letting other people know how easy it is. Well, that's what we'll tell them anyway. About a month before Josh Fox released Gasland in September of 2010, my wife received an email from his producer wanting to know if we'd be interested in receiving a free copy of the movie so we could show it in our area. Having read and heard a little bit about fracking, we decided it would be a good deal to accept the offer and learn a little bit more about it ourselves. Obviously, after watching that movie for the first time, we were appalled at what we learned, and we did decide to show it to as many people as we could. We started our own campaign against fracking from our home right in Alameda County, Iowa. We spent the entire winter learning as much as we could about the environmentally unsound practice of fracking, how it affects groundwater and air quality, what it does to the aquifers from which we all get our drinking water, and how so many companies and individuals at the corporate level were and are allowed to do whatever they wanted to promote and proliferate that practice of fracking, no matter the cost to the innocent bystanders whose lives might be in the way of their extreme extraction processes. For the next 2 years, we operated at that level, never realizing what a personal connection we would soon share with the victimized families of the shale plays like the Marcellus and the Barnett. Even more amazing to me was that in those 2 short years, because of our personal connection to fracking, I would meet many of the major players in Gasland and many of the major fractivists fighting this method of extreme extraction from all over the world. In September 2012, I had the opportunity to realize one of the biggest items on my bucket list, and that was to be able to hike a portion of the Appalachian Trail. And my friend John kind of set everything up, and John and I went. We did 52 miles within the boundaries of Great Smoky Mountain National Park. And it was just an amazing experience, but it was sullied. It was sullied by the fact that on that hike, I saw for the first time with my own eyes just what mountaintop removal does to a site. We drove by a couple of places that used to be beautiful mountains and now are just a scarred plateau that are covered with rusting metal and equipment left behind by the mining companies because it was more profitable to them to declare bankruptcy and leave everything behind. So now we've just got a pile of rubble where once there was a mountain. Surrounding that pile of rubble is poverty at levels you have never seen. It's a sobering, sobering thing. As emotionally troubling to me as that was, I was very excited to get home and share my experience with my wife because she's never been on the AT either. Well, you could call it the AT after you've hiked at least 50 miles of it. Otherwise, you gotta call it the Appalachian Trail. So, my wife picked me up at the train station in La Crosse on a beautiful September afternoon. One of those afternoons where the bird songs were sweeter. Even in downtown La Crosse, with the buses coming in and out of the depot with their diesel fumes, you could still smell autumn in the air. And that blue in the sky, on a day like that when it's so blue and so intense, it's like, it's physically palpable. You can just reach out and bring the blueness to you. It was one of those afternoons. I get in the car and I'm ready to tell my wife what a great time I had, and she says, "We got trouble." I said, "Oh, okay, what happened? Did the sheep get out?" And she let me know that there was a meeting coming up on Sunday, the next day, in New Albany. There was a sand mine proposed to open up in Alameda County in a place called Sand Cove. And there's a bunch of folks getting together to talk about it. So, we went to the meeting. We discovered that was true. There was a mining company interested in taking the hills out of Sand Cove. Alarmingly, it was frac sand. I thought, frac sand? What the heck is frac sand? That's the irony of the biggest part of this. All of that time I spent studying fracking and what's going on in North Dakota, and Pennsylvania, and Texas, and Colorado, and Wyoming, and everywhere else, and knowing full well that they use sand in the process, I didn't know it was sand that we had in Iowa, or Wisconsin, or Minnesota. Even sadder, I did not know that the hills of Minnesota and Wisconsin were already being raped for that sand. And within a couple of weeks when I made that discovery, I was mad. I was really mad. So what it basically boils down to is the sands of the St. Peter and the Jordan formations in Alameda and Winnebago County, Iowa, are the kind of sands that are perfectly suited for the fracking operation. They're physically the same as the sands being mined in Wisconsin and Minnesota. Our sand is in demand because of the demand for oil and gas, the fossil fuels. And it's a compelling demand. When I lived in California, I lived in the Motherlode, that area where in 1849 the gold rush happened. That's a glaring example of what a rush can do to an area. Highway 49 is awash with ghost towns. Now they're old enough to be quaint. For many, many years they sat empty and idle and dangerous. There are scars on the landscape in California from the gold mining, the gold rush, that, again, unless you actually see them and witness them for yourself, you can't understand the magnitude. There's a park, a state park north of Sacramento, called Malakoff Diggings. It's a huge canyon. It's picturesque. It's surrounded by ponderosa pine and jack pine. It's on the edge of the Central Valley and the foothills, and so there's prairie, and it's beautiful, and this huge canyon. It's all just spectacular, and it's all man-made. Thousands and thousands of acres gone forever from this low-lying foothill prairie area, oak savanna, that were washed away by hydraulic mining. In 3 short years, they took out 21 square miles of soil, in some places 1,500 feet deep. And I don't think that's much different than the kind of scars we can see with sand mining. Today you're going to have the opportunity to learn about the physical characteristics of the sand that everybody's after. If you haven't learned about that, I suggest you take that breakout. You'll have the opportunity to learn about the politics of mining and the effects on the economies of cities and counties and states. And you'll hear from some of the people who've been disrupted and displaced by sand mining. Ken Schmidt's in the audience. Ken is a great one to talk to this. If you have not heard Ken speak about what goes on locally with sand mining, catch his breakout today because he's a great man to listen to. You will also hear talk of the importance of regulating sand mining so that it's done safely. I almost choke when I say that kind of thing. As far as I'm concerned, we only need one regulation, and that is very simple. No stinking sand mining. That's all there is to it. If we can put a stop to the mining of sand in the Driftless area, we might just be able to put a serious crimp in the fracking fever that has so consumed America and has already devastated so many lives and large portions of once beautiful landscapes. The pro-fracking people falsely believe that we can frack our way to, I love this term, energy independence. Doesn't it just make you want to stand up and sing the Star-Spangled Banner or something like that? Energy independence. Oh, it makes me shiver. But not in a good way. They like to say that we have 100 years worth of fuel at our fingertips. It's the answer to unemployment in this country. It's clean energy. When you see those commercials on satellite TV where this beautiful lady comes out and talks about coal, America's clean energy, don't you just want to reach out and rip her right out of the TV? I mean, it's the same people, back in the 60s, when tobacco had such a bad image, this is the same public relations firm that cleaned up the tobacco companies' images that's working for the oil companies and the gas companies right now. The same company. That, and the best one of all, how much sense does it make to base one boom and bust industry on another boom and bust industry? You want to talk about gambling? World energy consumption has more than doubled since the energy crises of the 1970s. Here come the numbers, folks. More than 80% of the energy that we use right now is provided by fossil fuels. In the next 24 years, world consumption is forecast to grow by a further 44%, 7% in the US alone. Fossil fuels will continue to provide around 80% of that total demand. Where are these fuels coming from? Well, there's been great enthusiasm as of late for a renaissance in the production of oil and coal and natural gas, particularly here in the US. Starting with the calls in the 2008 presidential election, this brings back nightmares. Remember this? Drill, baby, drill! Politicians, industry leaders alike now hail, again, here's that quote, 100 years of gas and energy independence. Much of this great optimism is based on the application of technology like fracking and horizontal drilling to previously inaccessible shale reservoirs and the development of unconventional sources such as tar sands and shale. The real challenges, the ones you never hear about, of 21st century fossil fuel production suggest, they don't only suggest, they actually paint a picture for me. There is no way we can achieve those predictions. No way possible. The geological and environmental realities of trying to fulfill these exuberant proclamations demand a more truth-oriented and less industry-biased examination. Despite the rhetoric, the United States is highly unlikely to become energy independent. I'd like to say that again. Despite the rhetoric, the United States is highly unlikely to become energy independent unless our rate of energy consumption is radically reduced. That's where we step in. The much heralded reduction of oil imports in the past few years has in fact been due more to the Great Recession than it has to a voluntary cutback. And it certainly is not a story of increased production. Crude oil production in the U.S. provides 34% of our current liquid fuel supplies. Imports provide 42%. That's a 76% total. The remaining 24% is provided by natural gas liquids, refinery gains, and biofuels, and those things that they're experimenting with that we haven't even really heard about yet that are even more frightening. In fact, the Energy Information Administration, you've got to love the EIA, sees U.S. domestic crude oil production, including shale oil, the tight oil deposits, peaking at 7.5 million barrels per day in 2019. Now that is well below the all-time peak that we had here in 1970 of 9.6 million barrels daily. By 2040, if the rate continues at the rate it is today, the share of domestically produced crude oil is projected to be 32% lower than it is today. And yet, the media onslaught, the cries from Washington, and the industry itself can do nothing but scream about our forthcoming bonanza of energy. And it's all predicated on lies. The parameter most commonly cited by the industry right now to suggest a new age of fossil fuel is the estimate of in situ, which means those deposits in position in the bedrock, in situ unconventional resources, and the purported fraction that can be recovered. What they do is take those estimates and then divide them by the current consumption rates in this country, which gives them a number that shows that we'll have many decades or even centuries of future consumption. In fact, the industry and our government ignore two other blatant facts that they have to be in here when you figure about the viability of an energy resource. One of those is the rate of the energy supply. That is the rate at which the resource can be produced. A large in situ resource is no good to anyone if it can't be produced consistently and in large enough quantities in characteristics that are limited by geological, geochemical, and geographical factors, which also affects the cost in the end. It just can't be viable unless you figure in those factors. For example, if resources such as oil, shale, gas hydrates, in situ coal gasification, if you haven't read about that, don't. It's frightening. They have very large in situ potential. They do, because there's a tremendous amount of energy there, but it's prohibitively expensive to get. So what happens is everything we're getting right now is being produced in minuscule rates based on the sweet spots of these places that they've gone to, like the Barnett and the Eagle Ford and the Marcellus. And it's never, ever going to be enough to meet world oil requirements. But that's not what you hear. The second parameter that needs to be followed is what's called the EROI, the net energy yield. That's the difference between the energy input required to produce the resource and the energy contained in the final product. Energy returned on energy invested, EROI, of unconventional resources is always much lower than it is for conventional resources. Lower EROI translates to higher production costs. And, as we've all seen with the tar sands, with the sand mining, with the fracking, with all of these extreme extraction processes, it also contributes to a massive collateral environmental damage. What the world faces now is not so much a resource problem as it is a rate of supply. And that's what people don't get. Sure, there's a lot there, but the rate of supply cannot be met well enough, efficiently enough, or cost effectively enough to make it worthwhile. A great example, in 2012, there were 7,000 wells fracked in the United States. Those 7,000 wells were fracked and drilled and whatever they call the process at a cost of $42 billion. Any guesses as to what the net yield on that investment was? 10 billion less. It was 32 billion. So they took a 10 billion loss on drilling 7,000 wells, and they're screaming what a great deal it is. Or does it say stupid on my head? I mean, why do they think we're going to believe this? The best shale plays, like the Haynesville, which is actually one of those shale plays already in decline, are relatively rare. The number of wells and capital input required to maintain production will increase going forward as the best areas within these plays are depleted. The more we drill horizontally, the more those areas are depleted, and the more a company can come in, test a sweet spot 9 miles away from their competitors and say, oh, this is going to be great. But 9 miles away, their competitors are drilling right into the site from sideways. So there isn't anything there. Very high collateral environmental impact has been followed by pushback, and that's the word the industry likes to use, pushback from ordinary citizens, resulting in outright bans in New Mexico. May 8th, Mora County, New Mexico, no fracking, period. And it's all based on the Citizens' Bill of Rights, which guarantees them clean water and clean air, period. And it's standing up in court. They're going to win. No fracking. That ban in Mora County, New Mexico, moratoriums in New York, Northeast Iowa, Minnesota, Pennsylvania, Colorado, Maryland, and protests in other states have all been things that the industry didn't really count on. Shale gas production growth has been offset by declines in conventional gas production, resulting in only minimal gas production overall. Moreover, the basic economic viability of many shale gas plays is questionable in the current gas environment. Right now, I think, Robert, do you know, is it $2.40 or something, $2.04 per cubic foot? It's like 1/3 of what it actually cost to take it out of the ground. There's been a lot of talk about the shale oil, the tight oil production, and that has grown impressively here in the United States. It actually now makes up about 20% of our production. This has helped the United States crude oil production reverse years of decline and grow 16% above its all-time post-1970 low in 2008. More than 80% of tight oil production is from two unique plays: the Bakken in North Dakota and Montana, and the Eagle Ford in southern Texas. The remaining 19 tight oil plays amount to less than 15% of the total production in this country, illustrating the fact that high productivity in the shale oil plays are in fact quite rare. Tar sands, we've been hearing a lot about tar sand. It's primarily imported to the U.S. However, oh, yippee, this is good news. They're going to start a couple of spots in Utah where they've got some tar sands, so we're going to have it here in this country as well. It's very low net energy oil. It requires very high levels of capital inputs. To put it succinctly, it costs over $100 a barrel to refine Canadian tar sand to a usable state. Over $100 per barrel. Now, when you add the gas company profits to that, you add the transportation costs to that, by the time we get it in the market and we see it at Quick Trip at the pump, it's going to be 10, 12 bucks a gallon. That's going to be a wake-up call, isn't it? I mentioned some of the other unconventional sources. The coal gasification is one of them. It is kind of a scary process, and I don't particularly want to get into it here, but you can look it up and take a look for yourself, because it's another one of those processes that's just more costly to us and puts more money in the pocket of big oil and the politicians. I think you can probably say that at this point, the United States is in a prime position to be a worldwide leader in the exploration and development of oil and gas production. New technologies of large-scale, multi-stage hydraulic fracturing of horizontal wells have allowed previously inaccessible shale gas and tight oil to reverse the long-standing decline of U.S. oil and gas production. And then along came Jed. He was shooting at some crude, and up through the ground come a bubbling crude. If it was just that easy. Production growth is important, and it has provided some breathing room. But just about that much. Nevertheless, the projections by pundits and some government agencies that these technologies can provide endless growth, heralding a new era of, here it comes again, energy independence, in which the U.S. will become a substantial net exporter of energy, are entirely unwarranted based on the fundamentals. At the end of the day, fossil fuels are finite. They are finite, just like our sand. Did a call-in show with Joy Cardine one time on WPR, and I made the statement that using our sand from the Driftless area to aid and abet the process of fracking to get that rare, precious fossil fuel is rather like, well, making bullets out of gold to hunt for endangered species. That's how much sense it makes. The only way for us to become truly energy independent is to stop buying into the lie that we have to use fossil fuels to survive. We don't have to. We have the sun, we have the wind, we have our legs, we have bicycles, we have horses. We have ways around it, but it's going to be a lot of work, and it's going to be hard work. We have to set that example. My wife and I have a solar-powered pump, which we use to water our gardens for our CSA. This year I traded my old 8-inch reflector telescope for 2 solar-powered fans for the greenhouse. No more $115, $125, $130 a month to keep the breeze flowing through the greenhouse in the summer. We're getting power from the sun now. We used a total of 5.5 gallons of gasoline last year to maintain 3.5 acres, of garden. This year I'll use less than that for 4.5 acres. I worked my butt off, I do, but it's worth it. It really is truly worth it. It's our voices and our protests, the industry and their well-compensated abettors in elected positions did not count on. It is our actions that will put to a stop, once and for all. It will stop their unfettered greed.